Welcome to Activate Your Life. I am your host, Erin Esser, and I believe that life isn't a battleground. It's a playground of possibility where self-sabotage is transmuted into self-mastery. On this show, I share tools such as human design, astrology, inner child, and shadow work that help you disrupt your unconscious programming so that you can begin to experience the life that you desire. Don't forget to like, share, and hit the subscribe button to receive valuable information each week that will change your life. Thank you for joining me and welcome to the show. All right, welcome. Today, I have a really interesting and I'm very excited to have this guest of mine today. Her name is Chana Studley, and she's an educator and she's a coach, and she has recovered from severe PTSD and injuries after 3 separate violent attacks in the 1980s by exploring the nature of thought. She trained as a counselor with Manchester Women in Crisis Center and has been working with people in all areas of mental health for 30 years. Hana is a certified life coach and 3 principles practitioner. She is also a proud member of the United Hatzalah Psychotrauma and Crisis Unit and a World Health Organization psychological first responder. In 2019, Hana conducted 5 successful case studies into pain relief, and her research was presented at the 3PUK conference in London. She has now turned this into a new program and is helping people all over the world with chronic pain and other physical illnesses to heal by understanding the mind-body connection. Hana also had a very successful career in Hollywood, including an Academy Award. She has published 2 books, The Myth of Low Self-Esteem. It's a novel about trauma, Hollywood, and healing. And Painless, a novel about chronic pain and the mind-body connection. And whether you're watching on YouTube or the podcast or listening, we'll have the links to those books below. So check those out. But welcome, Hana. I'm very excited to have you on the Activate Your Life show. And
thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved reading about you and just your experiences that you have gone through to get to where you're at right now. And I'm not going to take away like your, thunder here, but because it's a beautiful story and it's a very powerful story. And so many people I feel right now are, they're in pain, especially with 2020 happening. There's so many things, and we were able to focus now, like a lot of the things that we were able to distract ourselves from in life has been taken away from us in so many ways. And so I feel that there's so many people now that are really focusing, 2020 for me, it was about vision, about corrected vision. So now we're seeing things that have come up to the surface. And for so many people, that is pain. It's trauma that has come to the surface. And I would just love to hear more about, your story and how did you get from Hollywood to, I don't want to say healer, but like Hollywood to coach and healer. It's quite a story. And so would you mind starting with us from that point?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I grew up in England, and like you said in the introduction, I was mugged 3 times, which is bad enough when you're mugged 1 time, but 3 times. The first time my skull was fractured right here. I know you can't see it, but I can put my finger right on the lump where it joined back together. The second time I was mugged by 3 men who jumped me 6 o'clock in the evening, just dragged me to the ground, beat the living daylights out of me. I thought I was going to die, and left me on a piece of waste ground. And the third time I was in London, and a young 16-year-old kid threw a bicycle at my head whilst I was cycling home from work. I worked in the theatre by that point. And he actually broke my neck. I mean, C2 and C3 were cracked through, although I didn't know it at the time. And I actually walked around for 2 years with a broken neck and didn't know about it. I mean, it was definitely sore, but thank God it wasn't the spinal cord, just the bones. But even so, it was all those traumas together. It was in the early 80s, and PTSD was only just going into the DSM at that time, the book that psychologists and social workers use for diagnosis. So all I got was a cup of tea and go home. Basically, that was my treatment. And consequently, I got stuck in really awful thinking, very dark places. terrified to leave the house, wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping properly, probably drinking too much, just punching the wall. They call that self-harm now. At the time, I was just, in total frustration, total anger, although I didn't know it because I had no one to talk to and didn't know what was happening. So it took me a long time to understand why I didn't ask for help earlier. And I think it was because I had trained as a counselor. I think I was, I had this story in my head that, people come to me with their problems. I should be able to cope. I didn't want to tell people that I was suffering and struggling so much. So I think my pride conspired with my training, and and I just sucked it up in that kind of very British, stiff upper lip thing. I kind of tried, but really on the inside, I was crumbling and so frightened. Although I wouldn't ever tell anyone. So finally, after I'd moved out to London, after the third incident, I went downhill pretty fast after the third one because I was convinced the world was a dangerous place, and I had evidence and proof, X-rays to prove it, right? Yeah. I was terrified to go out the door. And luckily, I finally found some people who were able to help me. And one of the first things that this lady said to me, she asked me if I was willing to let go of my story. And at first, I was very offended because I felt like, well, actually, what I heard and what she said were two different things, which I now notice when I work with my clients. Is what I heard her saying was, it didn't happen, it didn't hurt, and get over it. Yeah. In my head, I was screaming, it did happen, it did hurt, and I can't get over it. Because I tried so many, methods and techniques over the years. And so, but what she was saying to me is your story is not who you are. That what happened to you is not who you are. And so she kind of set me on a path of getting well. And letting go of the story and finding out who I really was. And in that healing journey, I started to get a bit braver and a bit stronger. And I started working in the theatre in London. And then I started working, I went from theatre to commercials to television and then movies. And so that's how I kind of went from one to the other. I'd always been creative and artistic. I did textiles at university. And so probably it was about 1990, I worked on my first movie, and it was the first Flintstones movie. I don't know if people remember that because it's a long time ago now.
I saw that on your website, yeah.
With John Goodman and Halle Berry and Rosie O'Donnell, and Steven Spielberg was the producer. So that was my first movie. I was flown out to LA, and we're making all the creatures and puppets and special effects. And I'm working with Steven Spielberg, and Elizabeth Taylor was in it, and it was an incredible experience. And that was just like the beginning. And then I went to, my next movie was Babe, the talking pig movie. That's what we got the Academy Award for. And then I moved to California, and I lived in LA for 16 years. And so when people usually ask me, how did you go from, working in Hollywood to now being a coach? What I tell people is I worked in special effects. My job in Hollywood was to convince you that things that weren't real were real, right? Yeah. Like, for example, I was known for making copies of real animals. Like in Babe, the dogs, I made the dogs. I mean, it takes a team of people to do these things, but that was what I was responsible for. And people say to me, there was no puppets in that movie. So I'll say, does your dog talk? Right? So obviously, in that moment, your disbelief was suspended, and you were believing that dogs could talk. Now, our minds do that to us all the time. We have a special effects department in our minds that's better than anything me or Steven Spielberg could come up with. My mind can convince me of things that aren't true all the time. Like from silly little things to big, like life-changing things or beliefs and ideas that kept me scared and kept me in a box and kept me like this idea of like, I thought I was the girl who had been mugged 3 times. And so when I was letting go of that story, it's like, then who am I? Mm-hmm. And who am I going to be if I'm not that girl? And depending on who I'm talking to, like if I'm talking to guys, it would be like, like, oh, save me, save me. If I was talking to other women, it would be like, oh, look how courageous I am. It was like, my whole identity was around these stories. Wow. And then as I started letting go of them, I started finding out who I really was. And so that's what kind of, that self-help work kind of put me in a position to start helping other people with all those experiences.
I love that. I love how you tied together what you did in Hollywood, right? These special effects and how you created this story of dogs talking and all of these things to
Right.
like, and then putting it together with bringing it back to even this woman that you worked with that said, are you willing to let go of your story? Right. You know, how it all of our, I really believe this, that our life is so many situations that are all pieces of the puzzle. And if we can take a look at this piece and go, gosh, how does this correlate with this piece over here and this piece? We can start to make sense of it in a way that, like you said, can help us stop being so fragmented, right? Because I feel like when we have all of these stories, it really speaks to the fragmentation, you know, part, and these, something happens to us, then, we develop an identity from that, or a story from that, and something else happens. And then we have to create another identity, but depending on the environment, like you're in, like you were saying, around women, you were one person, around men, you were another. And we do this, right? And some of that I feel is necessary on some level, but I feel like it's being aware of it and being conscious of it so that it doesn't run our lives. And I love how, you know, you said you were able to look through these stories and look past them to really get to who you really were, you know, who Hana, who she was deep down in that. So would you mind me asking, so what did you find out? Like, who is she? Who did you find underneath all of those stories? And how did you get to that place so that if there's, you know, people listening to this right now too, and they're like, oh yeah, I can relate to these. I have these stories too. I didn't really think of it like that, you know, as stories that I was telling myself that seem true. They seem so real and so true, but what if I could challenge these? What would that look like? How would you, you know, how did you go about this for yourself? And what did that look like for you?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, for a long time, like a lot of us, got stuck in the self-help aisle at the bookstore, you know, reading out all the latest books. I got into A Course in Miracles, and I was writing gratitude lists, and living in Southern California, I was obviously doing yoga and meditating.
Oh, sure.
Right, that's what everybody's doing. And you know, and you know, it really was a journey. And you know, I'm sure people have heard like that analogy of layers of the onion. Things started coming off, you know, like, and I knew I was always creative and artistic, but I never, this is something I found out recently about myself. I never thought of myself as an academic person. In England, in school, I don't know how it is now, but when I was in school, you had to take exams in every subject before you could graduate. We didn't even call it graduating. You were just so glad to not be at school anymore. You just ran away, got out of there. Anyway, and I failed my English language exam at 16 4 times. I tried, because I went on to take exams to get into university. So I still kept retaking this exam that we're supposed to finish at 16. 4 times I got 4 Ds. So that kind of put an idea in my head that I'm not academic. Now, that was okay, because thank God I had other talents. I had this like weird and wonderful talent to make things with my hands. So, you know, it clearly didn't keep set me back. But in the back of my head, there was an idea that I'm not academic. I'm not, you know, like, you know, I could never write a thesis. I couldn't, you know, do anything like with words or anything like that. And here I am. I've just published my second novel, right? Yeah. So one of the stories I had in my head is like, I'm not a writer. In fact, after the first book, I still kept saying that I'm not a writer. And then after I remember sending the first manuscript to a friend of mine, and I said to her, if it's no good, please be nice to me, because I haven't written anything since I was in high school. So, you know, if it's a pile of rubbish, then just tell me. And it was one of the scariest things I've ever done. I mean, I've stood on stage in front of 1,000 people and spoken. I've worked, you know, like I've had to like argue my case with, you know, John Travolta and like all kinds of other actors and stuff. You're like, put that down, go here, go there. And yet showing someone else my writing was terrifying, because I think I felt so vulnerable. And so I needed that courage. And so the very next day, I woke up with the idea for like 4 more books. So it was amazing. Once I let go of that story that I'm not a writer, boom, 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 boom. It was like almost painful that all these stories kept coming up.
Wow.
So that's just one example of how what I started seeing was that when we live in this thought-created world, we all live in a thought-created world all the time. That's not good or bad. It's just the way I've understood now that we all function. But the thought-created world can, like we've discussed, like become stories that are holding me back or keeping me in a box or keeping me in my apartment, or making my world small. And so when my world is small, because I'm believing that thinking, that's what's kind of creating the experience. And seeing that I can step outside of that there's actually a whole other world out there it's also made of thought, but it doesn't have to be the limited thinking that I was having at the time. And insight is the best way for that to happen, because using my intellect, that's usually what got me into trouble and got me like over analyzing and overthinking, which can lead to overwhelm and anxiety and all those kind of things. But stepping back and being an observer of my thinking, like watching thoughts go by. I mean, this was like, I kind of came across these ideas about 6 years ago, how you can actually step outside of your thinking. Mm-hmm. That thinking's kind of like a ticker tape that's going through your mind all the time.
Yeah.
And it's normal and natural to have sad thoughts or crazy thoughts, even criminal thoughts. But I didn't know before that I didn't have to listen to them.
Yeah.
Right. When I started seeing that I didn't have to listen to every single thought I had, that my thoughts weren't who I was.
Yeah.
And it didn't mean anything about me unless I thought it did. Then the freedom, your world starts to open up, and I've started to kind of see that I'm not that person I thought I was. I'm not the victim anymore, and I'm not even every day I might find out new things. It's an exciting adventure.
Well, I love that. And what I hear from that too, and what you're saying, is that our thoughts can either hold us prisoner or they can literally set us free. But it's about stepping back and, like you're saying, observing the movie script. It's really like a movie script going on in our mind, right? But if we think we are the movie, or then we're going to respond in a different way than if we step back and look through it and go, oh, that's interesting. I use the energy of curiosity is what I call it as well too, where I step back and I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. I wonder why I just thought that, I'm curious now about that, because I call it, it's moving from the battleground into the playground of possibility. And in that space, we can really look at all of these, it's even with emotions, right? Oh, I'm feeling angry right now. Okay, well, gosh, that's interesting. I wonder what's going on that I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling irritated, right? We can ask ourselves questions about this if we're tuned in. And like you were saying, if we can step back and be the observer of these things that are happening within us, rather than think that they are us. Because the minute, and I've done this, oh my gosh, in so much of my life, was when we think that there are us, it's like, then I am anger, and then I respond in that space, or I am that thought where I'm like, oh, I can't do this. Okay, well then I won't, right? Or versus going, oh, that's interesting that I don't, why do I have evidence for that? And even if I do, can I challenge that? Maybe that's not true, And so we get this whole new dialogue going in our mind to expand us versus keeping us small. So I love that.
I love what you just said about curiosity, because that's when I'm working with clients, I never give homework apart from the very first time I meet someone. I always say to them, get curious about where your experience is really coming from. Because for many years, I thought my experience, my how I felt, all my emotions, I thought they were coming from out there, the outside stuff. Meaning if he annoys me, or she doesn't, call me back, or this one ignored me, or this one hurt my feelings, then that's what was making my mood go up and down, or my self-esteem was dependent on the car I was driving or the job I had, and so those are all outside things. And if my well-being is dependent on those things, I'm gonna have a hard time trying to arrange and control everything. Yeah. And even if I can get things to be the way I want, with that mindset, I'm never going to be happy, because then this thing's going to go wrong, and that thing, then that thing needs to be controlled or changed. But so what I've seen is, I think where I got to on my own understanding was I started learning how to ignore those annoying thoughts, or but what I see now is that ignoring thoughts actually is more effort, is more thinking. Because if I try and ignore, I'm looking at you and there's a beautiful circle design on the wall behind you. If I try and ignore that now, I'm now actually thinking about it. It's
putting more energy into ignoring it. Yes. Right.
So what I found is you don't actually have to do anything.
Yeah.
If you go upstream a little bit further, and like I was saying, that we live in this thought-created world. When I started understanding the nature of thought, meaning that it's always fluid and always moving, it's never stays still. It's like clouds or a river or traffic, whatever analogy works for you. I don't actually have to control or do anything with my thinking because it's already moved on. It's already gone. And I innocently misunderstood that for so long, thinking I had to control my thinking with, I don't know, with writing or with meditation or with, all kinds of, it's a very virtuous stuff. But those techniques I found were only as good as my willingness to put them into action. Because when I was in a good place, I didn't need them. And when I was in a bad place, screw the meditation, screw the, I wasn't even like aware, I didn't even care anymore. Just give me some chocolate and, I'm out of here,
Yeah, for sure.
Whatever, drug of choice I had at that time. So, so the more I've seen that I don't actually have to do anything, the calmer my thinking has gotten. And then that's where the chronic pain thing came in. That I started understanding that it was my constant vigilance about my thinking, my environment, my situations, my relationships. That's what was keeping my nervous system revved up all the time.
Wow.
And that's where the kind of chronic pain thing kind of came in. And I started seeing how that's what was keeping me in pain.
Well, yeah, because and I just want to clarify with like your pain from what I read, and I would like, to you to even expand on this if you would like to, but your pain from what I understand from reading about it was like you couldn't even move, right, for days. And I remember in something you were writing, I think it was on your website, you were even afraid you would get hit by a car because you couldn't get across the street fast enough.
Yeah.
Like you were like literally like hunched over and like it was an effort. That's what I had this visual of like a little old lady, right? Like that is just in so much pain and can't move fast enough and wants to. And I'm sure it's so frustrating to be in that space, for you when you were there. It's so fascinating, that we can move from that space, right? And you didn't give up. You were like, wait a minute. Like there was, this woman came into your life, challenged you. You allowed yourself to be challenged. That's a big thing, I feel, is like we have to allow ourselves to go, wow, I think I do deserve better than what I'm in right now, whatever situation that is. But how would you, so many people have a really hard time with, there might be people like say in chronic pain, maybe they have, autoimmune, or maybe it was an injury or whatever it is, right? Like I know, oh my gosh, chronic back pain is huge for so many people, right? Like just that's debilitating. And so how would you, when you say this mind body connection, and, in my work too, it's about going internal and going inside. And I know you've said this too, what would be like the first step? I know you said with your clients, you say, get curious about where these things are coming from, but what would you say, how would you describe that? I guess this mind body connection, and what does that mean for you? And how would you describe it to somebody that's like, I don't know what the heck they're even talking about? Hey, this is Erin Esser, and I really hope that you are enjoying this show. I wanted to ask you this question. Imagine what your life could be like if you knew your purpose. I work with astrology and human design as tools of activating your life. I'm able to pinpoint specifically where in your life are your challenges and limitations, and then also be able to pinpoint where your dharma is, where your freedom is, where your liberation is, what your purpose is in this lifetime. For more information on my karma to dharma readings that dramatically shift people's lives, head to my website, erinesser.com, or you'll find the link below. Now back to the show.
Yeah. So I guess the way I came to understand it was that, I had chronic pain for 25 years. My chiropractor, like back when my neck was injured, he said to me, you're going to need to have treatment for the rest of your life.
Wow.
Which put another story in my head that I was broken and damaged and that I needed fixing, which I now believe is absolutely not true. And I went to chiropractors, in the various countries and places I've lived for 25 years, monthly appointments, always, and then more, like when I had those flare-ups, when I was almost paralyzed several times, like couldn't move my body from my chest down, terrifying. I mean, thank God it was temporary, but at the time I didn't know that, rushed into hospital a couple of times, in off the charts kind of pain. I'd wake up with my arm numb, and they said that's where the nerve came out of your neck. I had to have sciatica pain shooting down my legs. I was bent sideways because my pelvis was supposedly unstable because I have one leg longer than the other. Doctors gave me all kinds of reasons. And when I came across this new understanding of the mind that I've been talking about, I did some training, and I needed to save some money because I was flying from where I live here in Israel back to London and backwards and forwards. And so I hadn't had any pain for a while, so I cut out the chiropractor. And I have not been to the chiropractor in 6-7 years now, and I haven't had pain in 6 or 7 years, which is kind of ironic that when I stopped treating it, actually got better. Nothing against chiropractors. My chiropractor was amazing. She was one of the best I'd ever had. It was nothing personal. But what I started seeing was, I think in terms of the mind-body connection, when I look back now at the times when my back was hurting the most, and even hairdressers would say to me, your shoulders are so tight, and not just the back pain and the neck pain. I also had IBS, stomach problems. I had skin problems I had chronic acne most of my life. It's all gone now. I had psoriasis when I was in high school, eczema, all kinds of things happening, which I now know are all connected to when we're in chronic stress, it dysregulates the nervous system. Yeah. I mean, that's the simplest way to say it. So when I was doing all my training to be a trauma counselor, I learned a lot about the fight or flight response. And so just really simply, when someone is in like a car accident, God forbid, the house burning, the amazing way we're made is that our bodies are pumped full of adrenaline and glucose and cortisol and all the epinephrine, all these things. And that gives us energy to run, to move, to survive. But if you're sitting in stress for more than 20 minutes, which is what it was designed for, but you're sitting in stress for 2 hours, 4 hours, 8, 16, 18 hours a day, day after day, and it's never getting a chance to leave because we're not running, because we're sitting there, depressed, anxious, then that's going to dysregulate the body, primarily the nervous system. So that's why people then get cardiac problems, people get fertility problems, people get stomach problems. Back pain is the most common. And even if you have, like I had MRIs and X-rays and all those and scans and all those things done, just because something shows up on an MRI doesn't mean that's what's causing your pain, because there are plenty of people walking around with terrible things on MRIs. Like everybody has disc degeneration. If your doctor tells you you've got pain because you've got degenerative disc disease, there's no such thing. A 20-year-old, it's like gray hair and wrinkles. That's how our body is, like when we get older. Disc degeneration does not cause that kind of pain. So what was causing the pain? Like I talked about the Hollywood career, and then later I was a school teacher, which was, stand in front of a class of like 27th grade girls. That's terrifying.
That grade too, 7th grade. That's like,
they could hold a grudge forever, right? Yeah. Right. So I was constantly in a state of like stress, meaning I didn't think I was an anxious person, but I had this kind of secret terror in the back of my mind. What if they find out I'm no good at this? What if, like when I was working on movies, I was often the only woman. I was working with electricians and camera guys and carpenters and props guys. And I was, this was back in the early 90s. I was often the only woman on set with 30 guys. So I was constantly having to prove myself because I didn't want them to think I was a silly girl and they're just going to, dismiss me. I was a professional. I had reasons to be there. And so there's another story in my head was I had to prove myself. And then again with the teaching. And then I noticed that I was always trying to be better, the best, not to be rejected, because being rejected is painful, never wanting to go back into those I knew how dark my thinking can get. So this hypervigilance went from the PTSD outside kind of stuff. And I think it went inward into my thinking. And I got very hypervigilant about my thinking, which continued to keep my nervous system revved up and dysregulated. And when that happens, what I learned was that can affect the blood supply. So there's not enough oxygen going to your muscles get tight, and that's where the pain's coming from. So the first thing I say to anybody is the pain is real. You're not imagining it. Even though we're talking about thinking, the pain is real. Like the skin eruptions were real. The stomach pains were real. Yeah. But they were coming from an innocent misunderstanding of how experience works. That it's not coming from out there from the angry boss or the annoying neighbor. It's coming from my thinking about those things, which is good news, because then if it's coming from my thinking, then when I understand that thought is always flowing and always moving, see, I now know I'm not broken. I don't need fixing. In fact, I'm strong. I have resilience. We all do. Everybody has innate resilience, innate wisdom. And not only can my body heal itself, but so can our minds. That even our minds can never be broken. We might get covered up with a lot of stinky thinking, but like I was saying about insight kind of like gets rid of that schmutz, that those layers of of old ideas and all that stuff that's kind of covered up who you really are. And what I know now I really am is I am happiness, I am courage, I am wisdom. I don't have to go somewhere to go find those things. They are who we are, because God doesn't make garbage, right?
I love that. What I hear, I love that. It's like you realized who you were. You're not broken. You are wisdom. You are happiness. You are all of those. And what I hear too, and that is you couldn't see that before, because what we only know what we know, and we don't know what we don't know, right? Until we really look internally, until we go to those places and get curious and can step back. I mean, I really do feel like that is, if we're not able to step back from the story, step back from the thoughts, step back from, and just pause for a moment. It's like, okay, press this like big button. I almost imagine there's a big button, right? When these things happen, it's like, okay, pause, like we're on a game show or something, like pause it. And then just start to just go, wow, this is interesting that I'm feeling this or thinking this or whatever it is. Is this true? Could there be another truth in this? And I love that.
Well, one of the things that just occurred to me is another thing that has really helped me is, and I got this from one of my teachers, that one of my favorite quotes is, if only we could learn not to be afraid of our own experience, that would change the world. And I think that's what has really helped me, is that even I can still get funky thoughts. I can still get, a crazy thought, a sad thought, a depressive, anxious thought, but I've learned not to be frightened by them.
Wow.
Because that's what I think where I got the misunderstanding of who I am. Like you said, like I had all these other stories and these layers and layers of like stinky thinking and old ideas. It's not that there was anything wrong with those thoughts. The problem was that I was listening to them. That's the problem, that I was believing them.
Yes.
Because if I think I can only be well if I have pure, like spiritual thoughts, or I'll only be well if those outside things change, or I can only be pain, or only being 100% pain-free is the only option, is only like nothing less is good enough. There's such a burden in that. Whereas if I see that as just to spook, I have no idea what I'm saying right now, but I think thought is some kind of mystical spiritual energy that just moves through our minds. And sometimes there's sticky thoughts. Sometimes there's boring thoughts. Sometimes there's thoughts that I don't even notice. But the sticky ones, that are more about like who we think we are and what our self-worth and stuff like that. I've learned that I don't even have to listen to those either. Yeah. But I can have a crazy thought go through my head and I'm like, oh, thanks for sharing, blah, blah, I'm not listening. And the less I react to it, the less my thinking then gets busy and goes all haywire and depressive or, anxious, the less that's sending messages to my nervous system. And so I don't get pain anymore. I've been pain-free for over 6-7 years now. And guess what? I still have one leg longer than the other. My pelvis is still slightly slanted. All the reasons the doctors told me the pain was being caused by are still there. Yeah. So it was never coming from that in the first place. It was coming from my teacher, he always stresses innocent. My teacher is a retired psychiatrist. He's, been teaching. He started out as a surgeon and then into psychiatry. And he's been teaching these ideas for many, many years. And he always stresses it's an innocent misunderstanding. Whatever you're hearing, don't turn it into a judgment. Oh, I should have got this before. I shouldn't do it. There's no shoulds. It's like once I see the thought is flowing through my mind, I can step back and observe it. It means nothing about me unless I think it does. That's where the freedom is. That's where the pain started to go away. That's where the healing is, because outside of that anxious, insecure thinking is a whole fresh new world. And like I said about the writing, then think like ideas start popping up and new ways of being and new ideas come that I may never have heard before when I was stuck in listening to my stupid thinking, right?
Right. No, I love that. And, and just you think about like, had you stayed attached to those limiting beliefs that you were having, right? About that you're not good at writing, right? You're not good at academia, all these things. You said immediately when you left that story, that it was almost how I see that is like, it's like you close the door or, to that. And like, literally, I mean, a new door opened and it was waiting there the whole time of all these ideas, but it couldn't get in because our story is almost too big to let anything new in when we're in that place, because we don't have room. It's like a closet, right? If you have I always tell people this too, like if you have a really full closet, you can't get new clothes until you take old ones out if it's too jam-packed in there, right? Like we have to declutter, decondition, deprogram before we allow these new beautiful awarenesses and beautiful truths about us that are really the truth about us to enter in. And I love how you said that immediately when you let that story go, that there was this almost new birthing process was happening within you.
And notice that it only took one new thought, because I used to think it's going to take, because I've been in pain and darkness for such a long time, it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of time to get out of this. Not true. It just takes one new thought. Just takes an insight. Like little kids are the best teachers. You know how like little kids can have like screaming tantrum, bouncing on the floor, because they didn't get the candy or their sibling ran off with the toy or something. 2-3 minutes later, it's like it never happened, right? Like kids have natural innate resilience. We all do. We're all born that way. Yes. It's just that as we get older, especially by 7th grade, we've gotten so up in our heads and so self-conscious, and then we start believing those stories. And I've gone through my life like that. So what I see now is, when I'm working with people, that it can change in an instant. I've seen people like, their face is gray and they're hunched up, and when they suddenly go, oh, you mean I've been torturing myself with my own thinking? I go, yeah. You see that they're like their faces change with just one new insight. It's such we have such resilience. Like I was thinking, like the analogy I use is like a cork in water. Like if you put a cork like into a glass of water, you'd actually have to hold it down to keep it under the water. I'd have to like keep my finger on it. But the moment I let go, its natural innate properties are that it's going to bounce back up. And human beings are like that. The human spirit is like that. When it's not held down by those old ideas, then pop, it's like it naturally comes to the surface. You don't have to go looking for it. Like we said, it is who you are.
It is who you are. I love the simplicity in that. That's my intention, and it keeps coming up over the last couple of months, and it's something I'm definitely going to bring into in this new year that we're coming into is simplicity. It's like you touched on something just briefly a bit ago of like how we think that, and how you got stuck in this too. It sounds like, and I've done the same thing, and my clients, and I'm sure your clients, and we all have this almost addiction to, it has to be hard. It's like this program of like no pain, no gain kind of thing, right? And it's like, no, like you said, one question that allows us to expand, or one new way of looking at something, a new perspective is like a new world. It opens up a whole new world that was always there waiting. We just hadn't looked in that direction yet. And once we look there, we're like, oh my gosh, there's all these new possibilities that I never thought was imaginable before. And now they're here. And wow, I wonder what else could be possible in this that I never thought before. So I love that. And I love the simplicity of that, like healing and this journey to our own truth and wholeness literally can start with one new piece of wisdom and truth and question and awareness that can birth a whole new process and a whole new person. We become a whole new person. I mean, would you say that when you look back on that time, say in the early, in the 80s, when all of these things were happening to you, do you recognize that woman anymore?
No, yes and no. It's like, I remember when I first moved to America. Do you remember the movie ER? Like, it was a TV show called ER.
Yeah.
Right? It was a really good show. It was on Thursday nights, and I used to end up crying myself to sleep every Thursday night. And I'd wake up on Friday morning thinking, well, it's a good show, but it's not that good. And then I started realizing that because a lot of what I'd gone through, I'd ended up in the emergency room a lot of times. But the show was reminding me of all that pain. And I think I was grieving. I was grieving that young woman who had to go through all those things. And a lot of my pain was, why me? Why did this happen to me? I didn't understand, like, the injustice of it, the unfairness of it. And so I see now, like, I've got colleagues of mine who take these ideas into schools and work with young people. And like, if I'd known back then that I wasn't that crazy loop of, traumatic thinking, that what those guys did to me was not personal, it was like nothing to do, it was their stuff, not me. I think I would have healed a lot quicker. I needn't have gone through all that time, but that was my journey. And what I see when I used to tell people about it before, I would tell it so I'm manipulating you to get sympathy or attention. And now if I tell the story, it's to help people, so it's completely changed its meaning in my life. In fact, I spoke at a conference at the university here last year, and I spoke in front of several hundred people, and I went into quite graphic detail about the muggings and what actually happened to me. And these psychiatrists and professors of psychology and students came up to me afterwards, and they're like, but how could you talk about that in such a neutral kind of way? You were almost laughing. I said, because it's not who I am anymore. I'm not broken. I don't need fixing. And it didn't compute with them, because they come from a belief system that, if you go through something like that, then you're damaged and you're going to have to cope with it for the rest of your life. And I said, I've gone on, worked in Hollywood, traveling around the world, having a great time. It hasn't defined me. It's part of my history, but it's not. It hasn't defined me, and it doesn't have to. And they couldn't get their heads around that. Right? They really couldn't understand it, which is a shame, because they're teaching people. So like, it just feels like a mission now to get. To tell people that even if you've gone through some terrible things, or you're in something terrible right now, it doesn't mean it has to define you, or it doesn't mean that it's always going to be like this, because it's not. There is freedom there. Even the freedom can even be just in your mind.
That's it, right? That's it. We either are a slave to our thinking, or we can free ourselves by our thinking. And it all comes back to that place within us. And thank goodness that you had that woman, so many years ago that challenged you, even though it offended you in that moment and triggered you.
Right.
But you allowed yourself to open up to that possibility, and that's amazing. And I really believe that life is always life, God's spirit, universe, whatever we want to label this universal life force energy as. It's always trying to bring us home to ourselves. And so we always are having opportunities, people in our lives, situations that are giving us the opportunity to open up and go, oh, wow, or to shut down, or we can shut down more, but it's our choice, right? That's our free will in that situation. So I love that. So I know you work with people, you have clients and whatnot, and you have, books and I know you speak. I'm not sure, like, everything now with the world the way it is and stuff, but if somebody wanted to connect with you and learn more about what you do, and possibly, even work with you, and they're in, pain or chronic pain or whatnot, what's the best way that they can get a hold of you?
Sure, thank you. So I have a website. It's my name, which is hanastudley.com, CHANASTUDLEY.com. And so you can contact me through there. And there's lots of stories and information about my programs. I do mentoring and coaching. And I also have a Facebook group, has over 1,700 people in it now. Wow. And I post things almost daily in there about it's about chronic pain, but it's also about these ideas of thought and how we live in a thought created. We're always feeling our thinking. So there's a lot of posts in there, because a lot of people have just stumbled across my group, when they're searching the internet for help, and have heard these ideas and are getting well, and now they're sharing their insights, and it's incredible. It's such a privilege for me to it's like I have a front row seat in watching these people get well, which is incredible. So through Facebook or my website, that's probably the best way. And then I have 2 books, so they're both on Amazon, Amazon.com. So they're both available too.
Wonderful. And we'll put all those links too below, and your socials and the group and all of that, and your website. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much, Hana, for being here. I really loved listening to your story and just hearing, you speak about your experience, and really you being an expander for so many people of, what else is possible for them. I think when we hear stories about trauma and recovery of that and true healing of that, it causes us to go, wow, maybe my life doesn't have to end the way that I think it is right now, the way that I think it's going right now. So, so I thank you for being here, and
thank you. It's been great chatting with you, and thank you for the opportunity. It's wonderful.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining me on today's show. To learn more about Activate Your Life podcast and my YouTube channel, just go to erinesser.com. Download the free gift at erinesser.com/healthy-boundaries. That is all for now. We'll see you next week.